Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be wrapping up my reading of August. I haven't done like a monthly reading wrap up in quite a while, but I did feel like doing it this way again this month because I wanted to wrap everything up before shortly September and then start with a clean slate. So yeah, a good old-fashioned monthly wrap up. I read 10 books this month. 5 of them were from my own TBR. I had 3 audiobooks and 2 books from the library. And I'll go through them in the order that I read them. So the first book I finished was Skinship by Yoon Choi. I actually got this book for my birthday last year as a sort of blind date with a book situation. And I hadn't heard about this book or this author before, and I don't think I've seen anyone else talking about this book, which is a shame because this was a really good book. It's a short story collection, a debut short story collection. There are, I think, 7 stories in this book, and they are all quite long stories of about 30 to 40 pages, and they all center Korean American families with family members who are either first or second generation immigrants, and these stories are often about that clash between the first and second generation and how they are trying to understand each other. So there is stories where language plays a big role and how subtleties in meaning get lost in translation. Sometimes there's more of a cultural disconnect, or just about 2 people finding each other but who are never quite at the same place at the same time. And I mean like emotionally at the same place. Whether that is because of generational differences, age difference, language, cultural differences, and all these stories are quite poignant and sad in that regard, because there's this obvious love and respect, and people care for each other in these stories. They're just not often showing it in the right way, or like they don't know how to ask for what they want. And what I liked as well is that these are stories about Korean immigrants, but they're not about like them trying to find a place in America, and especially their place in white America, but more about their personal issues, like duties they have towards their family and identity, and their personal struggle to give their life meaning. The tone of these stories is quite subtle and understated, almost with like a bit of a melancholy undertone. Yeah, I thought that these were some really excellent stories. It's a shame that this book hasn't got more hype. I think a short story collection that everyone has been reading is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Rightfully so, because that collection was brilliant, but I think this collection has the same sort of emotional staying power, with like characters that feel very real. So even though they're very different collections, I still think that if you like one, then you would like the other, and this one definitely deserves some more readers. The next book I read was this graphic novel. This is The Prince and the Dressmaker by Wang. This is the Dutch translation. So at the beginning of this book, this sort of hoity-toity lady marches into a tailor shop asking if he can make a dress for her daughter by the day after for a ball. And he's like, well, I'm not sure, we're kind of busy with like making other dresses for other ladies, but he finds this one dressmaker who could make it. So the dressmaker, who is a young girl called Frances, she talks to the daughter, like asking what she wants for the dress, and the daughter says, you know, I don't care, just, you know, make me look like a she-devil. So Frances, she makes the dress, and the next day it's revealed at the ball, and it's this black half see-through dress with feathers, and the woman is wearing black eye makeup, and it's, you know, all in all not looking like a pretty lady. So the tailor gets mad at Frances, saying, like, you don't ask the person who wears it what she wants, you ask the person who pays for it. And just as he's about to fire her, this mysterious man comes in, saying that he wants to hire the person who made the dress for his secret client, and he's absolutely willing to make, or he's willing to pay good money for it. And I won't say who the client is, but the book is called The Prince and the Dressmaker, so I think you can guess. And Story and Shoes. Yeah, this is a very heartwarming story about how the prince and the dressmaker make each other realize their dreams and reach their full potential. It's about being true to yourself despite of what others might think of you. I really enjoyed the artwork in this. I think especially the dresses are really beautiful. I'll show you some of them. So like this is the black dress that Frances first made. And this is the first dress that she makes for the prince. So yeah, very vibrant colors. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Then I listened to Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. I know JVN mainly from Queer Eye, and I really enjoy his personality on that show. And this is his memoir. He talks about his life growing up queer in a small Midwestern town, how he started working as a cosmetologist, and how he finally ended up as being one of the Fab Five on Queer Eye, and about all the trauma, hardships, mental health issues, struggles with addiction he went through to be the person that he is today. And I was very impressed with this memoir. I mean, I could see that Jonathan Van Ness is not an author. The pacing is kind of weird sometimes. I think some points get way more attention than others. You know, he writes exactly like he talks. I listened to this on audio, and I do think that's the way to go with this book. But I ended up really loving it because he's very open and honest. He doesn't gloss over the bits that maybe are not so pretty, and he talks about all the parts of his life that make him the person that he is today, even if he's not always proud of that. It's definitely like a journey of self-love and acceptance, and I think in that it is very inspirational. So yeah, I think give this a go if you like his personality, but if you don't have any interest at all, then I don't think this will be for you. And then I had two buddy reads back to back, both kind of post-apocalyptic stories. So I read I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This is translated from the French by Ross Schwartz. Jacqueline Harpman is a Belgian author, and I read this with Kim over at Middle of the Book March. So this is quite a short book. It consists of 3 parts, and in the first part we meet our main character. She's a teenage girl. I think she's about 14 years old at the beginning of the book, and she lives in this big underground prison cell together with 39 other women. And they are given like just enough water, food and water to survive, pots and pans to prepare food, but like as soon as they have finished eating, their cutlery and everything gets taken away. And other than preparing food and maybe taking care of personal hygiene, they are not really allowed to do anything. and they are constantly watched by guards, who are always groups of 3 men. And our protagonist has been in this bunker since she was a little girl. She doesn't know when she got there, but she doesn't remember anything from her life from before that. And since she is the youngest girl of the group of 40 women by quite a bit, she's also the only one who doesn't remember. Like all the other women will have some memories of a life before, when they were living in a regular society, you know, like the one we are living in today. But the protagonist just knows her life as living in the bunker with these 40 women, you know, being guarded by men. And in the beginning of the book, you see the protagonist kind of discovering her own sense of self. Like for example, she starts counting her heartbeats, you know, all day long, and with that she becomes a kind of a human clock. And also she has these fantasies about the guards, and she discovers that if she keeps those a secret, she will have a kind of power over the other women. And you know, she realizes that they are all in the bunker in the exact same position, and there's no reason why she has to share, because you know, old rules don't apply anymore, and that gives her this sense of power. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you any more about what happens in the book. I think I will say that throughout the book, I became less and less interested in the how and the why of the book. I wasn't so much interested anymore in learning how these women came to be in the bunker, you know, what events led up to that, what is going on in the wider world that they live in. I think it's a lot more a book about ideas and character development than plot. Yeah, I really liked how the author talked about how these 40 women related to each other and, you know, filled in their day-to-day life. I enjoyed how the main character gave us a fresh perspective on the way society works. She was the only one who didn't know how society worked beforehand, and she would constantly question that, and ask, you know, why would they stick to these old rules of society when obviously the reality that they lived in had nothing to do with that anymore. You know, it's a book about what makes us human and what makes life meaningful and worth living. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend reading this, and also to read it with someone else, because this is a great book for discussion. So the next book I read was filed under YA post-apocalyptic in my library, but I think you should definitely not think of it like that. I mean, yes, it is a post-apocalyptic story, but you know, it's definitely not the Hunger Games. So it is The Blue Book of Nebo by Manon Steffan Ross. She wrote this book in Welsh and then adapted it herself to English. And I wanted to read this book ever since I saw ever since I saw Heather review it. And then I saw Karen had it on her TBR, so we decided to read this book together. So this book centers a mother and her son, who I think is about 14 years old at the beginning of the book. And they, together with her small daughter, are living in a very small town in Wales, in this post-apocalyptic world. There has been some kind of nuclear disaster, and most of the people have either fled or they died of illness after radiation. But yeah, this mother and son duo are still there, and they are trying to survive. You know, mostly their days consist of growing and hunting for their food, taking care of their basic needs. And then one day, the boy Dylan, he finds an empty notebook, and he and his mum decided to use it as a kind of diary, but also with the idea of like kind of recording what is happening to them for prosperity, to read and learn about them and how they lived at that time. And then they also decide that they won't read what the other one has written. And so this way you read the story in a very unlinear way, because they both write about the present, but they are also both writing about their memories. So it's a lot more like a puzzle that you are piecing together. And I loved reading this book as well. It was similar to I Who Have Never Known Man, in that here you have a boy who also doesn't have any memory from life before the end, as it is referred to in this book. And because he can look at it from a different perspective, he will often point out things that are very strange to him, but normal to us. And that makes the mum, and with that us, realize that maybe we take a lot of things for granted, and maybe as a society we act a bit weird sometimes. Like the mother would maybe say that before you could go to a shop and get a chocolate bar, and Dylan asked, were you hungry? Was that why you got the chocolate bar? To him, a boy who has only ever grown his own food, the concept of a store where you can just walk in is baffling, and then getting food when you're not even hungry, that's a concept that he can't understand. Or the mum would say that there used to be loads of people and you would just pass each other in the street without even saying hello. And obviously to Dylan, who has not seen a single person other than his mum and his little sister in years, that just seems like madness. And the book constantly points out these little things that we don't think twice of. And it makes you think like, is this the right way to do things? And this is something the mom is very conscious of. She doesn't think this way of living she's doing now is entirely bad. She's enjoying a life that is a lot more simple and stripped down to what is really important to her. And she has a life now that is a lot more meaningful. Before she was a lot more anxious, but now she has a clear purpose, and life in general is not so noisy, both in a literal and a figurative sense. So yeah, I do hope more people will read this book, because it's such a beautiful, sad, simple but powerful story, and I really enjoyed this. Then I read Feria by Ana Iris Simón. This is a book translated from the Spanish. I haven't seen an English translation of this book yet. It's about a young woman. She came from quite a poor part of Spain. Her family used to have a booth at summer fairs and festivals, so she would spend a lot of her childhood traveling. But she moved to Madrid when she could, because she felt a little bit embarrassed by her family's lifestyle and her poor background. But now that she's a bit older, she is realizing that maybe her family's way of living wasn't so bad after all, especially because they have a close community around them. They have their own homes. While she is still struggling to connect with people in the big city and, paying way too much rent. So this book is basically a love letter to her family. She describes her childhood and growing up in this family with such warmth and respect. Basically showing that, look, maybe we had it rough sometimes. Maybe we didn't always do things perfectly, but we did have each other, and there is some strange characters in this family, but we could always count on each other. I think she paints such a great portrait of a family in Spain at a certain time and place. It was very vivid, and I loved how colorful it was. But there were a few things that bothered me, and two in particular. I think most importantly, the author ended up glorifying this traditional way of living, and I don't think she gave enough attention to the flip side of this. For example, it is very conservative in its views, for example, on gender roles. She idealizes the life of past generations without acknowledging that, maybe yes, some things were better before, but we've also moved forward a lot in positive ways in society. And the other thing was that in all that she tells about her family, I didn't get to know her as a person at all. She described her family members so well and so vividly, but I couldn't tell you anything about the protagonist. Nothing about her character. So yeah, I ended up having mixed feelings about this book, but I do think it captures a place and a time very well. Then I listened to Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.F. Steadman. This is a children's fantasy book. It's about a boy named Skandar, and he wants to be a unicorn rider. It turns out that unicorns are maybe not as beautiful and serene as you might think. They don't belong in fairy tales, but they belong in nightmares. But there are a few chosen children who will have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see a unicorn egg hatch and then bond with this unicorn. And then once you've bonded with your unicorn, you can control elements with them and you can ride them. And Skandar at the beginning of this book is getting ready to do his exam to see if he's allowed to go to this island and see the unicorns hatch and bond with the unicorn. But obviously things do not go to plan. Dun dun dun. I think we've all been waiting for a Harry Potter type of story that is not written by a TERF, and I think maybe this is it. It is such a fun, adventurous fantasy story. It has the chosen one trope, which I'm not always a fan of, but I think in children's book it really works. There's this kind of school learning setting where the kids are getting taught in controlling the different elements, with different teachers. They have this group of kids that are kind of randomly thrown together, but who become really close friends. There's like fun and exciting races and battles. It just had a lot going for it, and I had a lot of fun reading this. I think the only little critique I have of this book is that maybe things would happen a little bit too conveniently. We need to break into this very secret and secure place. We just happen to know someone who can smuggle us in. Or, they would immediately know what to do. So I think I missed that little bit of depth where they would maybe make a wrong decision or something. But other than that, I thought this was really great. I also read The Last Quarter of the Moon by Zijian, and this was translated from the Chinese by Bruce Humes. The book starts with this elderly woman who is sitting amongst the trees thinking back on her life. She goes all the way back to her childhood and tells about her life up until the present. She is a member of the Evenki tribe. They live in the northeastern part of China, close to the Russian border. And because they are reindeer herders, they are not set in one place, but rather they follow their reindeer to where they can find food. I must say that the author is not a member of the Evenki tribe, but I did read that she studied them very closely, and I feel the way that she writes about them feels genuine and respectful. So in the beginning of the book, she describes quite an idyllic childhood. She's living in close contact with nature. Her life is very simple and very much about discovering the natural world around her. But of course, as she gets older, she realizes maybe life isn't as idyllic as she believed when she was a young girl. They will have to go through things like severe weather or illness that comes to the reindeer herd, things that are going on in the bigger world. At some point, a lot of the men in the tribe will have to go away to serve in the Japanese army. There's things within their own tribe, like members of the tribe dying, people having children, struggling with infertility. So yeah, just this sense that life's a bit more complicated than she maybe thought at the beginning. I loved the nature writing aspect of this. It really reminded me of other indigenous writing that I read on the close connection to nature and on how they let nature guide them and teach them and provide for them without mistreating it. I loved reading about different rituals they had surrounding big life events. I think it's quite a slow book. Obviously, this is a book about a group of people and about everything that happens to them over a span of decades. So things happen, but it's not a plot-driven book. It just kind of ripples on. I did get a little bit bored at the end because it started to feel a little bit repetitive, but I did like just being in this environment and this climate with these people. So even if there wasn't that much happening, it was nice just being in the book. I'd say this book is all about the vibes. So yeah, I suggest pick up the book, read the first 10 pages of it, see if you're vibing, and if you are, then you're good to go. Then I listened to The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFede. I heard of this first on Greg's channel of Supposedly Fun. I think it was one of his, and I think also his husband Joel's, favorite reads of last year. So this is a book about the events of 9/11, but in particular about how all the planes had to divert because of airspace closing in the USA. So it centers around this small town called Skandar in Newfoundland, Canada. It is located right on the most eastern tip of Canada. So its airport had always been a landing spot for maybe emergency medical situations on planes coming in from Europe. But on September 11th, they suddenly had this huge crisis with 38 planes landing in Skandar, bringing with them nearly 7,000 people that had to be accommodated in a town with a population of only like 10,000. So this book consists of different stories of different people who were involved in this, both citizens of Skandar and the surrounding towns, as well as passengers on the plane. What they did to accommodate these people, how they provided for them for the days they were stranded there. And this is a very heartwarming account of how the people of Skandar came together as a community to welcome these strangers into their homes. The book feels a little bit all over the place. It tells the story chronologically, but then other than that it's quite random. A few people you follow from the beginning to end, but then there's also random anecdotes. And I ended up having very mixed feelings about this book. I think on the one hand it was this very heartwarming account, and I love reading about how this community came together and reading about the different things that they did. I think all the planes getting diverted is obviously a part of 9/11 that doesn't get talked about that much, and it's good to realize what an impact it had on so many people's lives. There were so many things that had to be arranged that you don't even realize. Like, for example, the people didn't have enough of their prescription medication, so the local pharmacy had to contact doctors from all over the world to see what medication they needed. So yeah, I like those aspects. But there are three things that bothered me. So the main takeaway from this book was the welcome that the people from the planes got, how they were made feel welcome, and the hospitality and openness towards strangers, and how like everyone did their part to help these stranded passengers, and these acts of kindness were praised so much that I felt like, does this say something about the hospitality of the people in Skandar, or does it say something about the inhospitality of everyone else? I think at one point someone even said like we were treated like guests instead of refugees, and I think that was just very telling. Just the fact that people were so surprised by how they were welcomed, when a lot of these things to me were just human decency. I think it told more about the person on the receiving end of the hospitality rather than on the giving end. And then the other thing was that this book is very US centered, and with that I mean that on multiple occasions the author would explain something that was outside of the United States, but not when it was inside the States. So for example, two of the passengers just went to Kazakhstan to adopt their daughter, and he would say something like, Kazakhstan is a country in Central Asia and it borders these and these countries. And to me that is something you should either know as general world knowledge, or if you don't, it's the responsibility of the reader to look that up. Especially because, you know, this couple was from Texas, but he wouldn't say like Texas is a state in the southern part of the US and it borders Mexico. You know, it's kind of assumed that you know. So it bothers me when an author assumes that the reader doesn't know something that is outside of the US but does know things about inside the US. Another example was, at some point there was mention of the Troubles in Ireland. I can't quite remember the context of that. But the author said something on the lines of the Troubles, or what they would sometimes call the conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Ireland. And again, I think that is something that you should just know or find out for yourself. Just like it is assumed that everyone knows that by 9/11 we mean the terrorist attacks on the US on September 11th, 2001, and it isn't just a random date. So yeah, that's something that often bothers me, but in this book there was just a little bit too much of that. So yeah, these two things kind of left me with a little bit of a sour aftertaste. I feel like the more I think about it, it just doesn't sit quite right with me. And I don't mean the actual events of what happened, but maybe just the way the author writes about it. I can't quite pinpoint it either, so let's just leave it at that. And then the last book I read in August was Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Cespedes. This is translated from the Italian. This is the Dutch translation by Manon Steffan. It was first published in 1952, and I think it only just recently got translated, or maybe got rediscovered, because the Dutch translation was from 2022, and I think the English translation was also done quite recently. It seems like the author was quite an interesting character. She was born in 1911 and she had an Italian mother and a Cuban father. Her books used to be censored in Italy because the female characters were way too independent. She was part of the resistance in the Second World War. She was friends with people like Simón de Beauvoir and Natalia Ginzburg. So yeah, definitely an interesting character. This book is about a woman named Valeria. She's in her 40s, she's living in Rome with her husband and her 2 children. I don't know exactly how old they are, but they study at college or university, so definitely adult children. She works in an office and she has this very modest, uneventful life, typical of what life would be like for a lot of women in Italy at the time. And the book starts with that one day she's at a shop and she sees these empty black notebooks and she decides to buy one for herself and use it as a kind of diary. And there's this immediate sense of secrecy around this notebook. She doesn't want anyone to read it. She doesn't even want anyone to know that she has it. Every time she writes in this notebook, she feels bad, like she's doing something that is forbidden. Because her life has been in the service of someone else before for so long, she's kind of forgotten what it's like to be her own person, with her own thoughts and desires. She says, like, I can't remember the last time someone called me by my name. My own mum always calls me baby, my children call me mum, and even my husband calls me mummy. And through the act of writing in this notebook, she discovers a sense of self again, which on the one hand she finds kind of exciting, but on the other hand also a bit scary, because she's been in this role of mother and wife for so long that if she finds out she can do something that is just for her, it's a bit overwhelming, and she's actually too afraid to do it. And I think this is especially clear in her relationship with her daughter, who is definitely from a next generation and wants a lot more freedom and independence for herself than her mother had. And that gives these really interesting conflicts, because Valeria might think about doing something for herself, but actually doing it is going a step too far. And the daughter, she's all doing it. So there's this sense of both admiration, but also jealousy and bitterness towards her daughter. So yeah, it's very much a character-driven book. And I think especially Valeria is portrayed in such a rich and complex way. She's a likable character, but she's not easy to love. She definitely makes some frustrating choices, and I think that's what makes this book so interesting. So yeah, I'm very glad it got translated and that we all have a chance to read it. So yeah, that's it. That's all the books I read in August. Overall, I had a pretty good reading month, I'd say. I think I had like a 4-star average rating, which is better than average for me. I also ended up reading 5 books for Women in Translation Month, so I'm pleased with that as well. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please tell me about your reading month. Did you read any good books in August? Especially if you have read anything. If you've read any good Women in Translation, I would really love to know. And I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.